through the day has been on what has been said by George Soros. We've been tracking non-stop political reactions coming in on this big story. And remember, questions being asked by the BJP of the Congress with regards to the photo proof that the BJP has now put out on social media, questioning whether or not there is a direct link. But yes, all of this got sparked off ever since George Soros, the American entrepreneur, made some very sensational charges, especially with regards to Indian democracy and the Prime Minister of the country. Well, we have a very exclusive voice on this. We have Editor-in-Chief Rahul Shivshankar, who got into a conversation with Kanchan Gupta, INB Ministry Advisor. That's the conversation playing out.
Viewers, we are joined by Kanchan Gupta, who is an advisor to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, as well as the Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for speaking to Times Now. George Soros has greatly upset the government and also the Bharatiya Janata Party that has accused him of demonizing India's democracy, and I'm quoting Smriti Irani here, and intending to bring an onslaught on the economy, unquote, for personal gains. What makes an individual businessman so powerful so as to do all of this?
Well, George Soros has a history of playing a subversive role in countries around the world. Don't forget how he brought the Bank of England down. He has sort of created all kinds of problems for other countries. And don't also forget the Arab Spring, quote-unquote Arab Spring, the great bloodshed, which happened because of George Soros's role in it. So he has taken upon himself the task of civilizing the world, and he has the money to play around with. So that's how it happens, and there's nothing new about it, about his role, about his disruptive role, about his destructive role. And it was all along suspected that George Soros had a role in everything that has been happening this past few months, leading up to the Hindenburg report. So now all that has come into the open, and it has come into the open in a very dramatic manner, because the Munich Security Conference is hardly the platform where somebody like George Soros should really be hosted. It is a platform for security-related discussions and how to avoid conflict and how to maintain stability, which is the best guarantor for peace. And here is George Soros, who uses that platform to virtually declare war on India and its democratic institutions and democratic process. And that is patently unacceptable. I don't think it is about the BJP and the government alone, but this is something which hugely impacts every Indian national.
But Mr. Gupta, there are several very established people in the world who are associated with Mr. Soros in one form or the other. To many, he's a do-gooding billionaire crusader for democracy. He's a committed Democrat. His support to the Arab Spring was in the interest of promoting democracy around the Arab world, etc., etc. That's what they say. And they have no qualms about either accepting his money or sharing a platform. Now, some of these individuals operate very freely in India, do praise the Prime Minister. Bill Gates is one of them, if I'm not mistaken. So why is George Soros then such an insidious presence?
George Soros by himself is an extremely insidious person. The organization he runs, the Open Societies Foundations, the Open Society Foundations, is a very insidious foundation. I have no doubts about it in my mind. And this particular organization of his, funded by George Soros, has been used for creating turbulence, economic turbulence of creating political turbulence, of creating social turbulence. And he, as I began by saying, that he believes that he is some sort of a messiah on whose shoulders rests the onerous task of civilizing the world. Now, thank you very much, but we can do without it. And when you refer to the Arab Spring, I don't think the idea was to sort of inject democracy into the streets of Arab countries, but to create instability for the Arab palace. I mean, this is a different institution altogether. The West will never get how the Arab social, political, and cultural structure operates. And the whole idea was to create disruption, of creating of an insurrection, and which had a very bloody consequence. And frankly, nothing has changed. So the people paid the price for George Soros's interventionism. And Rahul, if you look at it from that perspective, what he said today, or what he said yesterday at the Munich conference, is direct intervention in India's political process. And that is totally, totally unacceptable.
Now, I want to ask you this because the MHA had placed Soros's Open Society Foundations in India under a watch list in 2016, to be precise, for funding organizations that were working outside the ambit of the FCRA. Now, what has come of this entire issue? It's in the courts since 2020. What has come of it? And if there are these very serious criminal accusations against Mr. Soros, why haven't they sort of materialized into action?
Well, the Soros funds were put under scrutiny. And as you yourself say, the Open Society Foundations was put on a watch list, or organizations funded by the Open Society's foundations they were put on a watch list. The matter went to court, and now the court has to decide. But the government itself is very clear that this is not innocent funding for good work. This is funding meant for creating political turbulence. We know exactly, you know, I know, who are the recipients of this money. And interestingly, the vice president, the London-based vice president of the Open Society Foundations, was part of the Bharat Jodo Yatra.
So you believe that the participation of Mr. Shetty in the Bharat Jodo Yatra somehow links the Congress party with George Soros and this attempt at discrediting India's democracies? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm just merely pointing out that the vice president of the Open Society Foundations, this vice president is based in London. He flew down to be a part of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. Now, what that implies is for people to decide and for the Congress to explain, and the reason I mention it is that I think a statement was issued by Mr. Jairam Ramesh saying that we don't need George Soros for this purpose. But the fact is that you did have a very high-level functionary of Soros's foundation as part of the Bharat Jodo Yatra, and they should really try and explain what was this person doing over there, in what capacity did he join the Bharat Jodo Yatra, and why was he allowed to be a part of the Bharat Jodo Yatra, given the track record of Open Society Foundations, and given the track record of George Soros. Rahul, it is also interesting that there are multiple beneficiaries of the Open Society Foundations. And I really don't wish to take names because then it becomes sort of a slanging match. But there is nothing professional about working for the Soros Foundation. There has to be something more than that. And that is what we should be looking at. And I think it's time we got to the bottom of it.
So my last couple of questions to you. Regime change is what is being hinted at least by the government here.
Well, the government has not invented it, and the government has not sort of, thought of it out of thin air. George Soros has multiple times made it very clear that his purpose in life is to force a regime change, and in India especially. This is not the first time that he has struck out at Prime Minister Modi or at the government headed by the Prime Minister Modi. He has done so previously also. On several occasions, he has allowed his displeasure with Prime Minister Modi, with the government he heads, to spill into the open, and he has done it in a very brazen manner, with impunity. And again, I think I was explaining to somebody earlier today that there's an emerging new information order which replaces the 1980s UNESCO fashioned information order. This new information order is largely about narratives, about manipulating narratives, about external influences in internal politics, about influencing political processes, about intervention in elections. And all these pieces of the new information order jigsaw are falling into place in very quick succession over the past few weeks. Mm-hmm. What has happened today is that with Mr. Soros' statement, a very key piece has found its way into the jigsaw puzzle to hold it all together. So as I said, that this is not about some goody two-shoes statement about democracy in India, nor is it about personal dislike for Prime Minister Modi. It is a political statement, it is a political commitment, and it is a political challenge that has been thrown at India. And this statement, commitment, challenge is about an open declaration of intervention in India's political process, intervention in India's election process, and intervention in India's institutions and the manner in which they function. So
let me also draw your attention. One of the spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Mr. Poonawala, has just tweeted an image of a tweet from Mr. Shashi Tharoor back in 2009 or so, where he says, met old friend George Soros, upbeat about India and curious about our neighborhood. He's far more than an investor, concerned world citizen. That's how Mr. Tharoor at one time described Mr. Soros. And a large number of people, as I began by saying, would agree with him, most probably. And therefore, I want to ask you one final time before we wrap up, Mr. Gupta. Are we today sounding a little like the Indira Gandhi years, where the foreign hand was given so much of an emphasis?
I do not subscribe to conspiracy theories.
Right.
I do not subscribe to the view that the whole world is conspiring against India. That is not true. Look at the way the whole world looks at India today. Had there been some great global conspiracy, the world would not have looked at India the way it looks at India. But having said that, I entirely believe that there are extremely dangerous, disruptive, and destructive forces at play. I I'm entirely convinced that George Soros plays a major role in that. The tweet which you just read out, put out by Shashi Tharoor, goes back to 2009. And George Soros, I think, also visited India to go visit a member of the Nehru clan and said that old friend and etc. etc. So I also am given to believe that some very senior politicians from the UPA ranks, their children work for George Soros organizations. And so that's why I said that there are various beneficiaries in this country. I look at them as collaborators, which would be, such collaborators would exist in every country around the world. They collaborate with people like George Soros to bring grief and destruction to their own country. So I'm not surprised the way it has played out. I don't think it's about some vague foreign hand intervening in India. Here is a man who is known for his interventionism, backed by his billions of dollars, which he has often made by manipulating the markets. Don't forget that he has faced investigation after investigation after investigation for market manipulation. So he's not someone who's free of blemish.
Okay.
And that is why I'm saying that the face which was behind the targeted attacks on India over the past couple of months has emerged. Rahul, a last point. The BBC takes external funding for its special projects, quote unquote. And it would be only fair for the BBC to come clean on who funded the two-part so-called documentary on Prime Minister Modi and India. Unless they come up with a convincing, credible statement explaining who funded the project, we are free to believe that the money came from George Soros's Open Society Foundations.
It is
for the BBC to deny it.
Right.
It is for me to prove it.
Okay. Well, Kanchan Gupta has thrown down the gauntlet there, the BBC. Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. No one can accuse me of not asking all the direct questions in skeptical tone as possible, and Mr. Gupta of not replying freely and frankly. Thank you very much.